The knock on my cabin door wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect from a neighbor borrowing sugar or asking about your fishing plans. No, this one was sharp, precise. The kind of knock that came with authority. I peeked through the side window. Standing there was a tall man in a navy blue shirt with a plastic badge clipped on crookedly. His walkie-talkie looked like a toy. His holster was empty. But it wasn't just the look. It was the way he stood. Like he thought he owned the land beneath his feet. That's when I knew something was off. "Open up," he barked, now pounding the door. "This is HOA enforcement. You're in violation." HOA enforcement? Out here? My cabin sat on 40 acres of private land, miles outside any town lines. There were no streetlights, no neighbors, just trees, wildlife, and my old hound dog, Max, who was now growling low from under the porch. I quietly unlocked my gun safe behind the coat rack. I didn't draw my sidearm, not yet. I'd learned long ago not to escalate unless it was absolutely necessary. But I knew this wasn't just some nosy neighbor. Something darker was going on. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" "You can start by identifying yourself," the fake cop said, adjusting his flimsy badge like it actually meant something. "We got reports that you're building illegal structures on HOA property. You need to vacate." That's when I smiled. "I'd love to chat," I said calmly, stepping outside with my badge now displayed clearly on my belt, the real one. "I'm Commander Jack Brennan, head of state police, and you're not a real cop." His face drained of all color. His eyes flickered between my badge and my holstered weapon. That's when Max growled louder, and the guy's hand twitched toward his walkie-talkie. "Stay right there," I said in a voice I hadn't used in years. The voice that made full-grown men stop cold. But he didn't. He ran. And that's where things went from strange to insane. Who sent him? What did they think they could do out here? And more importantly, how many more of them were out there? Now, let's rewind, because how we even got to that moment is a wild ride. It started 4 months earlier, when I bought the cabin after retiring from the state force. My wife Lisa had passed 3 years before. Cancer. We fought it hard, but sometimes you lose the fight no matter how tough you are. After her funeral, I knew I couldn't stay in the city any longer. It was filled with too many memories, too many ghosts. I packed up what mattered, sold the rest, and moved upstate to a quiet town called Halverson Ridge. It was peaceful, the kind of place where birdsong greeted you in the morning and coyotes howled in the distance at night. My land stretched so far that I could hike for an hour and still be within my property lines. There was no HOA. That's why I bought it. The locals were friendly, mostly older folks who had lived there for generations. I made quick friends with Bill, a Vietnam vet who ran the bait shop near the lake. Bill was one of those guys who could talk to you for hours about nothing and still leave you smiling. He introduced me to Marcia, who owned the general store. She knew every secret in town and made the best peach cobbler I'd ever tasted. Life was slow, and I liked it that way. But everything changed when I started renovating the cabin. It began with a simple shed. I wanted somewhere to store tools and maybe build furniture. The day after I laid the foundation, I found a note stuck to my front gate. HOA notice. You are not authorized to build structures. Cease immediately or face consequences. There was no signature, no seal, just bold red ink. I laughed. There's no HOA here, I thought. I brought the note to Bill at the bait shop. He frowned as he read it. "Don't laugh," he said. "You're not the first." "What do you mean?" "There's a group of folks down south, maybe 20 minutes from here, who think they own more than they do. New money, moved in a few years back and built a gated community with fancy fountains and rules. Now they act like they run the whole county." "But I'm not in their community," I said. Bill nodded. "Doesn't matter. They think if you're near them, you're under them." That didn't sit right with me. I served this country, protected its citizens, and now some wannabe neighborhood kings were trying to push me off my own land? I ignored the note. A week later, I came back from a morning hike to find yellow tape wrapped around my shed. HOA enforcement do not enter was scribbled across it in permanent marker. This wasn't just annoying anymore, it was harassment. So I filed a report with the local sheriff's office. Sheriff Harlan was an old friend from my academy days. He came out, took pictures, and promised he'd look into it. A few days passed, then my power went out. At first I thought it was just a line issue. But when the utility crew arrived, they told me someone had submitted a disconnect order in my name, forged signature and all. I knew exactly who had done it. That night I sat on my porch in the dark with Max by my side and a shotgun resting across my lap. Not because I was scared, but because I knew something was coming. And sure enough, it did. Which brings us back to that knock on the door. I chased the fake HOA cop through the woods for 15 minutes, but he disappeared past the creek. He'd parked his truck out by the old logging road and left tire tracks like breadcrumbs. But I didn't follow them that night. Instead, I called Sheriff Harlan and told him everything. And just as I hung up, I spotted a red blinking light across the trees, aimed right at my cabin window. A camera. That's when I realized they weren't just harassing me, they were watching me. But why? Who were these people? And what did they think they were protecting? I was about to go get the camera, but then Max started barking like a wild dog. And I turned toward the back of the cabin just in time to see the shadow of another man slipping past the trees. I wasn't alone out here, and this time, they weren't just knocking, they were surrounding me. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments and let me know. Have you ever had a run-in with a fake authority figure? Or someone who thought they had more power than they actually do? Let's meet the key characters you'll want to remember for what's coming next. Jack Brennan, retired state police commander, strong sense of justice, living alone with his dog Max after his wife passed. He's smart, calm, and trained for worse than this. Max, Jack's loyal hound dog, old but alert, fiercely protective, and always the first to notice when something's wrong. Sheriff Harlan, Jack's old friend from the academy. Now sheriff of the local county, he's straight-talking, dependable, and doesn't like fake authority either. Bill, Vietnam vet, runs the bait shop, knows everyone in town, and is more connected than he looks. Marcia owns the general store, local gossip hub, sweet but sharp. And now, the shadowy HOA group just introduced themselves. Max's barking turned into a deep, rapid growl. That was his serious bark, the kind that meant trouble wasn't just near. It was already here. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight in one hand, sidearm in the other, and moved along the side of the cabin. Max stayed close, tail low and tense. I flicked the beam into the woods, scanning the tree line. For a second, everything was still. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement behind the oak trees. Not deer, not raccoons. A man. I yelled out, "This is private property. Armed homeowner. Show yourself or I will defend myself." No answer. But I could hear footsteps now, retreating, fast. I held my ground. I wasn't about to chase someone through the dark woods without backup, not when I had no idea how many were out there. So I called Sheriff Harlan. "You still out there?" he asked, voice low and serious. "I've got at least 2 individuals on my land. One fake cop already came to my door. Another one sneaking around the back with a camera. This is no prank, Harlan." "Understood. I'm rolling out now. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary." "Copy that." While I waited, I did a slow perimeter check of my property. No fresh damage. But that blinking red camera light, still there. I yanked it down and brought it inside. It was a cheap motion-activated camera like something you'd find on a discount shelf. But the SD card inside might tell me more. Sheriff Harlan arrived 20 minutes later, lights off, cruiser quiet as a whisper. He stepped out wearing a heavy jacket, hand resting on his holster. "You all right?" he asked, eyes scanning the tree line. "For now," I said. "They're gone, but I'm sure they'll be back." We brought the camera inside and plugged it into my old laptop. The footage showed a man creeping through the trees, face covered by a hoodie, but his build was slim. He placed the camera on a tree facing my cabin window, then looked straight into the lens as if checking the angle. "See that?" I said, pausing the footage. This wasn't random, he knew what he was doing. Harlan sighed. "I've had 4 other complaints like this in the last year, all from folks who live near the Briar Hills community." I narrowed my eyes. Briar Hills? The gated neighborhood with the fancy sign and the phony patrols? Yeah. They created their own HOA a few years ago. Real paperwork and all, but they've started thinking they control more than just their gated lots. They don't. Exactly, but they act like they do. There's a guy running it, Walter Pierce. Used to be a big-time developer in Chicago, moved here with a boatload of money and started calling himself HOA president. And now he's sending fake officers to intimidate landowners? Harlan nodded slowly. Wouldn't be the first time. I'm going to make sure it's the last. Harlan gave me a look. "Jack, don't go storming down there with a badge and a grudge." "I won't," I lied. The next day I decided to pay Briar Hills a little visit, not to stir the pot, just to see the faces behind this circus. The front gate was guarded, not by security, but by a man in a vest that said Community Enforcement Officer. He was leaning back in a lawn chair, sunglasses on, playing with his phone. I pulled up in my truck and rolled down the window. "Need to speak with Walter Pierce," I said. "You a resident?" he asked, barely looking up. "No, but I think Walter knows who I am." He looked over my truck, then at me. "Name?" "Commander Jack Brennan, head of state police." The man sat up straighter so fast his sunglasses nearly fell off. 1 second. He radioed someone, whispered something into the mic, then waved me through like I was royalty. The houses were pristine, cookie cutter, the kind of fake perfection that made you nervous. Every lawn manicured to exact height, flags placed at the same angle. Not a single out-of-place object in sight. I hated it. Walter's house was the biggest one. 3 stories with stone columns and a ridiculous fountain out front that probably cost more than my entire cabin. He opened the door before I even got out of the truck. Tall, clean-shaven, white hair slicked back like a lawyer in a soap opera. "Well, if it isn't the sheriff's friend," he said, voice dripping with smugness. "What can I do for the great Commander Brennan?" I stepped closer. "Cut the act, Walter. Someone from your HOA sent a fake cop to my door yesterday. That's a felony. And if you're behind it, I promise you, and it won't end well." Walter raised an eyebrow. "A fake cop? That's a serious accusation." "So is trespassing. So is illegal surveillance. So is forging a utility disconnect." He smiled like I'd just complimented him. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. We take community security seriously here, and sometimes certain measures must be taken when outsiders ignore boundary lines. I'm not part of your HOA. My land is outside your jurisdiction, and yet you keep showing up. That's not enforcement. That's harassment." Walter didn't even flinch. "Your shed is less than 200 yards from our designated zoning perimeter. Under local ordinance, any structures that impact water flow, fire access, or visual aesthetics." "Cut the lawyer talk," I snapped. "That shed is on my land, built legally, surveyed, permitted. You don't get to rewrite the law just because you think you're king of the cul-de-sac." Walter stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You may be head of the state police, but out here, I have more power than you think." "Oh?" I said, stepping even closer. "Let's test that theory." He didn't respond, just turned and went back inside, closing the door without another word. I drove away, more sure than ever that this wasn't over. That night, I installed 4 new motion-detecting lights, 3 trail cams, and a silent alarm system around the cabin perimeter. Max slept inside for the first time in years, right at the foot of my bed. I had a gut feeling, and I was right. Because at exactly 2:17 a.m., The silent alarm buzzed. I grabbed my gun, threw on my boots, and checked the monitor. There were 3 figures on my land this time, 2 creeping around the shed, 1 near my generator. I stepped out onto the porch. Flashlight on. Hands where I can see them, I called out, aiming straight into the dark. They froze. One of them bolted toward the woods. The other 2? They turned, and one of them raised a wrench, high, and ran straight for me. I didn't hesitate. One loud shot into the air sent them scattering, but this wasn't just some prank anymore. They came to disable my power, maybe worse. And someone with money and planning, sent them. The question now wasn't if they'd come back, it was how far they were willing to go. And more importantly, how far I was willing to go to stop them. The next morning, I didn't wake up to birdsong. I woke up to a black SUV parked at the edge of my property line. Unmarked, tinted windows, engine still running. Max growled again, low and steady. This was becoming a pattern, one I wasn't going to tolerate any longer. I poured a cup of black coffee, clipped my badge on my belt, and walked right up to the vehicle. I stood in front of the hood, arms crossed, waiting. 30 seconds passed. Then the driver's door opened. A man in his late 30s stepped out. Slim build, black suit, clean cut. Looked like he hadn't worked a real day in his life. But he carried himself like someone with authority, the kind that came from behind a desk, not a badge. "Morning," he said, flashing a fake smile. "Cut to it," I replied. "You with Pierce?" "I represent several parties concerned about unauthorized development near Briar Hills." I chuckled. "Let me guess. HOA patrol? Code enforcement? Environmental compliance? You got a new title every day?" The man's smile didn't budge. "You're making quite a bit of noise for someone who moved here to be left alone. And you're making quite a few mistakes for someone trespassing on a state police officer's private land." His smile finally faded. "Walter Pierce doesn't scare me," I continued. "But he should be scared of me. I've already got trail cam footage, audio from last night's break-in, and video of your boys disabling my generator." The man raised an eyebrow. "You planning to press charges?" "Oh, I plan to do more than that." He sighed, took out a card from his wallet, and handed it to me. "Ethan Blake, property consultant, Pierce Development Group." I read it, then folded it in half and dropped it to the dirt. "Tell Walter I'm giving him 48 hours to back off, or I take this to the DA, the state, and every local news outlet in a 5-county radius." Blake nodded slightly. "Understood." He got back into the SUV and slowly pulled away, but the message was clear. This wasn't a surrender. It was a warning. I returned to the cabin, pulled up the trail cam footage from last night, and forwarded it to Sheriff Harlan. Within 10 minutes, he called. "I just watched it," he said. "Those boys weren't amateurs. Gloves, no prints. They knew where your generator was. One of them even had wire cutters." "You recognize any of them?" "No, but I'm running the plates from that SUV you mentioned. Can't promise much. Walter's smart. He runs everything through shell companies." "Then it's time I stopped playing defense." That afternoon, I went into town. I visited the county clerk's office and pulled land surveys, tax maps, and permit filings. As a state officer, I had access to records the public couldn't easily get. I started connecting dots. Walter Pierce wasn't just building homes. He was quietly expanding the HOA boundary using forged documents and shady zoning proposals. He'd submitted paperwork claiming his HOA had influence over properties as far as 2 miles outside Briar Hills. Most of it was unsigned. None of it was legal, but it was enough to confuse county officers who didn't look too hard. That's why he was coming after my land. He believed, or wanted others to believe, it fell within his reach. And he'd gotten away with it before. I left the courthouse burning with purpose. On my way back, I stopped at Marcia's general store. "Jack, you look like a man on a mission," she said, placing 2 jars of jam in a box. "I am. You ever hear of Walter Pierce forging HOA boundaries?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh, sweetie, everybody's heard something. but most folks don't want to tangle with lawyers, or worse, Pierce's so-called patrol. A few families moved out last year just to avoid his drama. Anybody still fighting? Maybe. You should talk to the Whitakers. They own the ranch across Mill Creek. Walter tried to fine them last summer for painting their barn the wrong shade of red. That's not even part of Briar Hills. Didn't stop him. I drove straight to the Whitakers. Eleanor Whitaker, 62, met me at the porch with a shotgun resting against the doorframe. Her husband, Carl, was mending fence wire by the pasture. They invited me in, poured strong tea, and showed me everything. Threatening letters, photos of unauthorized Code Patrol vehicles parked outside their property, even a fake notice of lien from the HOA. We filed police reports, Eleanor said, but nothing ever came of it. Everyone's too scared of his lawyers. Well, I said, pulling out my badge, he just picked the wrong ranch this time. As I stood up to leave, Carl followed me outside. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Jack, they're getting bolder. You need to watch your back." I nodded. I always do. That night, I made one more decision. I called an old friend, a cyber specialist I worked with during a joint task force operation. "Name's Walter Pierce," I told her. "I need everything you can legally find. Corporate ties, development deals, any skeletons." Her reply was sharp. "Give me 24 hours. But I didn't get that long. Because just before dawn the next morning, I heard Max barking again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my rifle and threw on a coat. The silent alarm had tripped again, this time on the west end of the property, near the ridge. I crept up behind the trees, crouching low, careful not to crunch branches. Then I saw it. A man in a black hoodie and gloves, digging into the ground behind my shed. Beside him was a metal box. I froze, heart pounding. He hadn't noticed me yet. I stayed still, watching. He opened the box. Inside, several sealed envelopes, a flash drive, and something that looked like a bundle of cash. That's when Max barked and the man spun around, flashlight in one hand, shovel in the other. We locked eyes. I raised my rifle and yelled, "Hands in the air!" He bolted. I chased him, boots slamming against mud and fallen pine needles. But halfway down the slope, he slipped, fell, and rolled into a patch of bramble. I reached him and yanked the hoodie back, and that's when I saw his face. He wasn't some thug. He was the same guy who claimed to be an HOA cop at my front door days earlier. Only now, he was bleeding from the mouth and whispering something strange. "They're going to bury me next." The fake HOA cop, the same man who'd pounded on my cabin door like he owned the world, now lay sprawled in the dirt at my feet, his lip busted, his voice shaking. "They're going to bury me next." I knelt beside him, gun still trained but finger off the trigger. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "Who's they?" He tried to sit up, grimacing in pain. "You don't get it. It's not just Pierce. It's bigger. The HOA stuff, it's just a front." I narrowed my eyes. "For what?" He coughed hard, spitting blood into the pine needles. "Money laundering, land grabs. They use fake patrols to scare people off. Developers swoop in after that." I looked at the half-dug hole in the metal box he had opened. "What's in that box?" I asked. His eyes darted toward it. "Proof." With one hand still holding my rifle, I dragged the box toward me and opened it completely. Inside were 3 bundles of cash neatly stacked, each wrapped with a strip labeled Pierce Development, Site 4. There was also a flash drive, some grainy printed photos, and a list of names. Dozens of names. Sheriff Harlan, Marcia, Carl and Eleanor Whitaker, even my name. Beside each name was a word. Buy, push, threat, or remove. My name? It had a thick red marker over it. Remove. Immediately. Something icy crawled down my spine. This wasn't about sheds or fences anymore. This was a targeted operation. They were mapping the community, deciding who to intimidate, who to bribe, and who to silence. I turned back to the injured man. "You're coming with me," I said. He shook his head violently. "No, no, no. If they see me with you, I'm dead. You don't understand. I was just supposed to scare you off. That's it. They said you'd leave once the violation notices hit your doorstep." I looked at him hard. "You crossed the wrong property line, son." I pulled out my radio. "Sheriff Harlan, this is Jack. I've got someone you're going to want to question. Bring backup, quiet and fast." The guy whimpered. "You don't know what you've stepped into. Walter isn't the boss. He's just the face." I froze. "If Walter's not in charge," I asked, "then who is?" The man didn't answer. He slumped back, breathing heavily, either from fear or exhaustion. When Harlan arrived, he brought Deputy Griggs and an unmarked SUV. They took the man, whose name turned out to be Travis Lenning, into custody under suspicion of trespassing, vandalism, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Back in my cabin, Harlan and I examined the flash drive. It contained PDF documents. Some looked like building permits, others were scanned contracts. But one folder caught my eye. Expansion Plan, Halverson Ridge. Inside was a blueprint to buy out or intimidate every landowner within 5 miles of Briar Hills. The goal? Rezone the area into private development jurisdiction, essentially turning the entire town into a private HOA-controlled district. There were even communications between Pierce and a lobbying firm about influencing local elections. Harlan leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just an HOA war. This is a hostile corporate takeover of the county." I stood up. "Then we need to burn it all down." He nodded. "We'll need the Attorney General, and probably the feds. Call them. I'll prepare the statement, but we need to go quiet, fast, if Pierce finds out Lenning's talking." Boom! We both flinched as a thunderous sound echoed through the woods. Then smoke. I ran outside and saw it. My shed was on fire. Orange flames reached into the trees. The structure I'd spent weeks building was now collapsing into a pile of ash and heat. Someone had gotten past the alarm. No warning, no trigger, just fire. Max barked furiously as I grabbed a fire extinguisher, but it was no use. It was too late. A second explosion followed, smaller but sharp. That was the generator. Gone. I dropped the extinguisher and turned to Harlan, who stood frozen on the porch. "This was a message," I said. He nodded grimly. "They know we're coming." We watched the fire burn. Harlan radioed it in, but I didn't even listen, because what mattered most wasn't what we had lost. It was what they had just confirmed. This was war. And now? It was personal. The next morning, the town woke to news of the fire. Marcia called first. "They burned your place? Oh my Lord, Jack. Do you want me to bring food? Do you need help?" "I'm all right, Marcia, but I need something from you. Anything." "Have you ever heard of a man named Carl Dobson?" She paused. "Yes, I think. He used to run the county zoning office. Retired after some kind of scandal. Why?" "His name came up in the files. I think he approved fake permits for Pierce." She gasped. "He used to be so respected. Until he sold us out." I spent the rest of the day with Harlan going through every document from the flash drive. The web went deep. Shell companies, fake nonprofits, donation funnels. Everything to make it look like the HOA was operating within the law. But it wasn't. And now, we had proof. That night I stayed in a small cabin on Eleanor and Carl Whitaker's land. They insisted I not sleep alone. Max curled up beside the fireplace while I sat in a wooden chair, sharpening an old hunting knife out of habit. Then, a knock. Not on the door, but on the window. I spun fast, flicking the safety off my pistol, and crept to the side. Outside the window, standing half in the shadows, was a face I hadn't seen in years. Ethan Blake, the property consultant who showed up in the black SUV. He was soaked from rain, no umbrella, just standing there. I opened the window halfway, keeping my gun low but ready. "What do you want?" I asked coldly. "I need to talk, privately." Why? Because I was the one who planted the box, he said. I froze. What? I knew you'd find it. I needed you to. Pierce, he's not just expanding the HOA. He's working with foreign investors, land flipping scams. He has dirt on local officials, and if anyone talks, they vanish. You're part of this, I growled. Not anymore, he said. I was just supposed to keep things quiet, but after what he did to that family in Lakemont Ridge, I knew I had to expose him. What family? He looked down. The Parkers. Pierce forced them off their land. The dad vanished. They called it suicide, but it wasn't. I didn't answer. I just stared at him through the rain-soaked glass. I'll give you everything, Ethan said. Emails, contracts, a full list of officials on his payroll. But I need something in return. What? Protection, he whispered. Just then, a red dot appeared on his forehead, and before I could even react, crack! A rifle shot rang out. Glass shattered, blood sprayed. Ethan Blake fell, dead. Did you see that coming? Who's behind the shot? Just how deep does the corruption go? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Because the real boss behind the HOA mask is about to be revealed, and it's not who you think. I dropped to the floor instantly. The window blew apart as Ethan's body crumpled to the muddy ground outside. A second red dot danced briefly across the wooden wall inside the cabin, then disappeared. Down! I barked, grabbing Max by the collar and crawling toward the fireplace. The dog didn't resist, he sensed the danger. Gun still in my hand, I scanned the room for the shooter's position. It was a clean shot. Too clean. High caliber, suppressed. Whoever pulled that trigger knew what they were doing. A professional. I crawled to the window, staying low. Through the shattered frame and broken glass, I saw Ethan's body lying limp in the puddle, blood mixing with rain and mud. His eyes stared blankly, mouth still slightly open like he hadn't finished his last word. I was about to step out when Carl Whitaker burst through the front door, holding a double-barrel shotgun. What the hell just happened? He demanded. I motioned for him to stay low. Sniper. Took him out. From the tree line or higher ground. Carl pulled Eleanor down behind the table just as she came running in with a quilt. She gasped when she saw the blood. I need a phone, I said, eyes still scanning the darkness. Now. Carl slid me his. I called Harlan immediately. Sheriff, Ethan Blake is down, assassinated. We're at the Whitaker cabin. What? Are you hit? No, but the shot was surgical. Someone wanted to shut him up permanently. I'm on my way with state reinforcements, don't move. Wasn't planning on it. I ended the call and turned to Carl. You got eyes on the ridgeline out back? Yeah. Hunting scope, upstairs window. Then get up there quietly. Carl nodded and disappeared up the creaky steps with surprising speed for a man pushing 70. I stepped outside carefully, gun raised, and approached Ethan's body. He wasn't breathing. No pulse. Center mass shot. Clean through the heart. He never stood a chance. But his coat pocket was bulging. I reached in and found a flash drive wrapped in waterproof plastic and a folded note, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Jack, I can't live with this anymore. If I don't make it, everything is on this drive. Password 911 Lakemont. I'm sorry. E. I pocketed the drive and the note, then dragged Ethan's body to the side porch, out of view. I heard Carl's voice from the upstairs window. Movement. I see someone pulling back through the tree line, black jacket, scope in hand. Tall, not Pierce. Can you hit him? I called. Carl grunted. If I were 10 years younger. Then keep watching. Within minutes, Harlan arrived with 2 squad cars and backup. The Whitakers' land lit up with flashlights and emergency strobes as they secured the perimeter and covered Ethan's body with a tarp. Harlan pulled me aside. Tell me everything. I handed him the flash drive. Ethan was the whistleblower. He said the HOA was a front for land laundering and corrupt takeovers. He had a list of bought officials, investors. He gave me this just before he got shot. Harlan's jaw clenched. This is bigger than any of us thought. I know, and I don't think Pierce is in charge anymore. He raised an eyebrow. Then who? I don't know yet. But Ethan mentioned Lakemont Ridge. Harlan's eyes widened. That place was cleared out last year, fast. The county said it was a natural gas hazard, but that never checked out. Families vanished overnight. Exactly. He said one of the landowners was murdered, covered up as suicide. We drove straight back to the sheriff's office with the flash drive. It took some time to decrypt, but once we used the password, the files opened one by one. Audio recordings, emails, contracts, and then a video file. We clicked play. The footage was shaky, like it was taken secretly with a phone camera. Walter Pierce was sitting at a table, flanked by two unknown men in suits. Across from them was a younger man, nervous, sweating. "You'll sign the deed," Walter said coldly, "and walk away with your life. That's the deal. But my wife, she'll be taken care of. But if you keep pushing, your accident won't look accidental." The man hesitated. The taller man in the suit leaned in. "You have 24 hours. The video cut out. Harlan looked sick. "That man in the video, that's Jacob Parker, the one from Lakemont Ridge. He did disappear. They said he drove off a cliff. Looks like he was forced." We scrolled to the next document. A letter of approval, signed by none other than Judge Henry Barrett, our county judge. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Judge Barrett had been family friends with Lisa and me for years. He even gave the eulogy at her funeral. And now he was signing illegal land seizures? "You still think this ends with Pierce?" I said, locking eyes with Harlan. "No, I think this goes up higher. Much higher." Just then, Deputy Griggs knocked. "Sheriff, urgent. We just got word from Briar Hill Security. Walter Pierce is gone." "Gone where?" "His mansion is empty. Car's missing. Surveillance shows him leaving at midnight with a suitcase and 2 escorts." I grabbed my jacket. "Then he's running scared." But Griggs wasn't done. He pulled out a printout. This was found in Pierce's office on his desk. It was a map of my land, outlined in red, and the words, "Final Acquisition," written across it. Harlan muttered, "They were planning to take you out all along." I leaned in, eyes narrowing. But something on the map stood out. A hand-drawn X, deep in the woods, near my creek. I pointed. "This isn't part of any survey." Harlan looked confused. "What's out there?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But I'm going to find out." That night I hiked through the woods alone, Max at my side. Rain had stopped, but the air was thick with tension. After 20 minutes of climbing and weaving through brush, I found it. A rusty trapdoor covered in moss, half hidden under an old hunting blind. I pulled it open. Steps led down into darkness. The smell of gasoline and mildew hit me first. Then, the faint hum of electricity. I flicked on my flashlight and descended. What I found below wasn't a shelter. It was a makeshift command center. Computers, maps, radios, and a wall lined with photos of local landowners, all marked, tagged, monitored. One wall had a heading scrawled across the top. Phase 4. Remove stubborn elements beneath it. My photo, Marcia's, the Whitakers, and Sheriff Harlan's. Max growled beside me. I turned slowly and heard the soft click of a safety being switched off behind me. A voice said calmly, "You should have stayed in the city, Jack." I raised my hands slowly, then turned to see Judge Henry Barrett holding a silenced pistol pointed at my chest. Judge Henry Barrett stood in the center of that hidden bunker, gun leveled at my heart. His black trench coat was damp, his white shirt still crisp, like he'd come straight from the courthouse to pull the trigger. "You've always been a threat," he said, voice as calm as if we were discussing Sunday lunch. "Even in retirement, you just couldn't leave things alone. You gave the eulogy at my wife's funeral. I said slowly, my hand still up. You hugged me in front of God and family, and now you're pointing a gun at me? His mouth twitched into something resembling a smile. I meant every word that day. But this is business. Max growled beside me, inching forward. One wrong move and I'd be a memory. You were never just a retired cop, Jack. Barrett continued, circling me like a lawyer in a courtroom. You were always watching, always waiting. I told Walter it was a mistake to mess with your land. I told him it would lead to this. And yet here we are, I said. He stopped walking. You dug too deep. The HOA is just a tool for reshaping this county. Do you know how valuable this land is to our investors? Foreign money, energy rights, zoning exemptions, massive tax credits. We're not just building homes, Jack. We're building power. By burning people out, killing whistleblowers, forging documents. Barrett's hand tightened on the grip. We gave people a chance to leave peacefully. The stubborn ones made it messy. And what am I? I asked. A warning? No. You're the final loose end. I watched his finger start to move on the trigger, but he didn't see my left hand shifting ever so slightly behind me. I had palmed a flare from my coat pocket the moment I stepped inside. Too bad, I said. I've always been hard to bury. I slammed the flare against the steel wall. It hissed and exploded in a burst of blinding light. Max lunged. Barrett fired, but missed. The bullet ricocheted off a pipe as Max knocked him backward with a snarl that shook the bunker. I dove, grabbed Barrett's wrist and slammed it against the metal table. He screamed, the gun clattered to the floor. I pinned him with a forearm to the throat. End of the line, I growled. I'm not the top, he wheezed. I'm just a gatekeeper. That's when the screens on the wall flickered, and a new face appeared, grainy, older, bald with a silver beard and thick glasses. His voice came through the speakers, slow and calculated. Jack Brennan. Impressive, truly. I underestimated you. I stared at the screen. Who the hell are you? I asked. The man smiled. The one holding the strings. Walter was my puppet. Barrett was the salesman. I'm the architect. Barrett, pinned beneath me, croaked. He promised immunity. Money. The voice continued. I built the Briar Hills project as a prototype, a test for HOA-controlled territories. We've done it in 4 other states. This county was next. But you've become a complication. Pull the plug, I said, standing, gun now in hand. End this, or I come for you next. You've already lost, Jack. My men are en route to that cabin. In fact, he never finished. Because at that moment the entire bunker shook. Boom! Then shouting. State police, drop your weapons. I ran to the exit hatch and climbed out. Searchlights flooded the forest. Dozens of armed officers in tactical gear stormed the woods around the creek. Harlan stood near the tree line, walkie in hand, eyes locked on me. You good? Yeah, I shouted. Barrett's inside, and we've got video. He nodded grimly. We got the backup just in time. When you didn't check in, I figured you were walking into a trap. I handed him the flash drive from Ethan and pointed to the cameras. Get this to the feds. It's all here. The network, the hierarchy, the cover-ups. And that face on the screen? That's your new target. The next few hours were chaos. Barrett was arrested on the spot. The command bunker was secured, its servers confiscated by a federal cyber unit. Ethan Blake's murder was officially linked to a contract killer from out of state. They found the rifle buried under leaves less than a mile from the Whitakers' cabin. Walter Pierce? Caught that same night at a private airstrip trying to flee the country with $500,000 in untraceable cash and a fake passport. But the man on the screen, the architect, had vanished. We had no name, just a face, and a promise that this was far from over. Over the next few weeks, the media blew the story wide open. HOA corruption ring exposed, land grab scheme across 4 states. Retired state police commander takes down fake enforcement network. I didn't care about the attention. I rebuilt my shed. I helped the Whitakers install a better fence. Marcia started keeping a shotgun under the counter. And I finally slept with both eyes closed. At least for a little while. But one letter changed that. It came 2 weeks later. No return address. Just a thick white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A message typed in bold font. The HOA was only the beginning. And below it, a photograph of Max, taken that morning, at my front porch. Who do you think the architect really is? And how deep does this operation go? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from, because in the final chapter, the hunter becomes the hunted. And Jack's final move will shock you. I stared at the photo for a long time. It was Max, my dog, my only family now. He was sitting calmly on the porch, eyes bright, ears alert. But it wasn't the image itself that chilled me. It was the angle. The shot had been taken from a high elevation, a scope, most likely. Someone had been watching him, and me, from the trees. The message underneath was short, but loud. The HOA was only the beginning. I stood on my porch that evening, rifle slung across my back, staring into the darkening woods. Max sat beside me, tail still. The sunset had no beauty that day, only warning. They weren't done. And neither was I. The arrest of Judge Barrett had shaken the system. Walter Pierce was in a federal holding cell facing over 30 years for racketeering, conspiracy, and fraud. Dozens of shell companies tied to Pierce development were being dismantled piece by piece. Harlan said it was the biggest local takedown he'd seen in 30 years. But the architect, the bald man with the silver beard, he was still out there, and now he was watching. I made a decision that night. No more waiting. I reached out to an old contact, Commander Tara Nichols, cyber operations lead for the Department of Homeland Security. She owed me a favor after I saved her brother's life in a hostage crisis a decade ago. Within hours, she was on a secure call with me, analyzing the original video footage of the architect. She scanned the frame, slowed the video, zoomed in on a reflection in a picture frame behind him. "Got him," she said. "It's a mirrored skyline, New York East River view, that narrows it down." "Can you run a match on his face?" We did. Facial recognition pinged a match. Leonard Voss, former intelligence contractor. Thought to be dead. Disappeared 6 years ago during a corruption probe in D.C. Dead? That's what the government believed. Now we know better. I paced the cabin. How deep is he in? Tara didn't pause. Deep. Voss has connections across real estate, political lobbying, international financing. He's using HOA networks to run a larger scheme, identifying weak counties with poor oversight and turning them into controlled growth zones. It's land colonization through legality. And enforcement? Private military contractors, fake patrols, bribed judges. Anyone who questions the system? Gone. I leaned forward. Can we find him? Yes, Tara said, but not without risk. I live with risk. She smiled. Then welcome back to the field, Jack. The plan was simple, flush him out. We leaked a fake report to the press that Barrett was cutting a plea deal and naming everyone involved, including his international contacts. 3 days later, surveillance picked up movement, a private jet departing from a hangar in upstate New York. Registered under an alias, but the passenger list? Blank. And the pilot? Former military, flagged for smuggling once before. We knew it was Voss. They tracked the jet to a private airfield in Montana, isolated, surrounded by forest. No locals, no police, just one gate and a dozen guards. That's when I called Harlan. I need a team, I told him. He didn't even blink. When and where? The next morning, we rolled up with 3 SUVs, unmarked, armored, loaded. Harlan drove. I rode shotgun. Behind us, Deputy Griggs and 4 federal agents dressed in civilian clothes. All of them were briefed, vetted, and angry. This wasn't just law enforcement now. This was personal. As we approached the airfield perimeter, Max sat in the back seat, calm, as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. I spoke into the radio. Eyes up, we go in quiet. If we see Voss, I want him breathing. Copy that, Harlan replied. We moved in through the forest, reached the fence, cut through, and then, shots rang out, automatic. We hit the ground. Ambush, someone yelled. They'd been expecting us. We returned fire. The trees lit up with flashes. Dirt sprayed everywhere. I crawled behind a log and took aim. One shooter down. Another flanked. Griggs moved in from the right, took out the lights near the watchtower. Then I saw him. Voss. Standing near a black truck, shouting into a phone, protected by 2 armed guards. He was trying to escape again. I sprinted toward him, weaving between gunfire. Max chased after me, barking wildly. Harlan covered me from behind, dropping the last of the shooters with perfect precision. Voss turned, saw me coming, and jumped into the truck. Too late. I tackled him just as the engine started. We tumbled onto the gravel. He pulled a small pistol from his jacket, but I was faster. I smashed it from his grip, pinned him to the ground, hand at his throat. You sent killers to my home, I growled. You burned down my shed. You murdered Ethan Blake. Why? Voss spat blood and sneered. Because I could. I slammed his head into the ground once, hard enough to silence him, not kill him. Sirens roared as federal agents swarmed in. It was over. Leonard Voss was arrested and taken into custody. His network collapsed like dominoes. Over 60 arrests were made nationwide over the following 2 weeks. Judges, contractors, developers, even local officials. The HOA corruption ring was gone, burned from the inside out. And me? I finally rebuilt. My cabin, stronger than ever. The shed, bigger. I added a flagpole out front. The American flag flew every morning at sunrise. Marcia visited with cobbler every Sunday. The Whitakers brought fresh eggs and honey. Harlan came by with his fishing rod once a week. Max slept soundly now. No more barking at shadows. But I never let my guard down. Because one day another envelope arrived. No return address. Just a black sheet of paper. No words. No logo. Just a small emblem pressed into the corner. An oak tree surrounded by stars. I'd seen it before. Once. On a file marked classified during a federal joint task force in Virginia years ago. A symbol tied to something deeper. A group darker than any HOA, any developer, any corrupt judge. And I knew right then, this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If you made it this far, you're a real one. Tell me where you're watching from and what shocked you the most in this wild HOA roller coaster. And remember, even in quiet places there are people who think they hold the power. But there's always someone watching, someone ready to stand their ground. Just like Jack.